In this episode of Motive's RB and GTR Tuning Guide, we talk about which oil you should put in your engine. One of the most common questions we see asked online about the RB is what oil should I use? And the most common answers we see are, firstly, check the owner's handbook and see what the manufacturer recommends, which we think is, well, completely wrong. The next most common answer is ask your engine builder what you should use. And we think that is, well, sort of correct, mostly correct, but not always. And then there's our answer, which is put 10W60 in every single RB engine, the end, period, case closed. Now, we have a lot of evidence and experience of why we recommend 10W60 in RB engines, and there are other people out there that are going to argue that and say that what they've done has worked as well, and we're not going to discredit anyone else's opinion on that. We're just going to show you why we think and why we have shown that 10W60 is the best option. Now, before we start talking about that, let's take a look at engine oil viscosity so you at least have a basic understanding of how it works. Now, on the front of an oil bottle, you're going to see numbers like this: 0W20, 5W30, 15W50, 10W60, etc. So the first number with the W next to it is basically, well, the base weight of the oil. Now, if an engine oil only had that one number, it would be a pretty straightforward oil. And that's just basically a number that relates to its viscosity. The higher the number, the more viscous it is, or essentially the thicker it gets. But you can see here there's two numbers, and the reason they have two numbers is a multi-grade oil has the ability to have different viscosity levels when cold and hot. So this first one, the 5W, is the viscosity at 0 degrees Celsius, which is the freezing point of water. And then the 30 is the viscosity at 100 degrees Celsius, which is the boiling point of water. But this is also around about the operating temperature of what an oil is. So when you think about it logically, at operating temperature, this first number means absolutely nothing. Really, all that first number does is determine the viscosity during cold start. So we're going to throw this graph up on the screen that you can find in pretty much any owner's handbook that shows you what grade of oil you need based on what the temperature is outside your house where you live. So you can see by that that even a 10W60, the 10W part is good all the way down to negative 25 degrees Celsius. Now, I don't know about you, but I would say out of all the RBs in the world, there's not a lot of them that get driven around in negative 25 degrees, and if they are driven around in temperature that cold, they're probably started and warmed up inside a garage where it's not that cold anyway. So realistically, the argument about 10W60 being too thick because it's cold where you live is pretty ridiculous. So really what matters is this second number. This second number is how that oil behaves when it's at operating temperature 100 degrees. And let's face it, most engines are going to operate between sort of 88 and 100 degrees Celsius, and quite often go over that when they're on track or any type of big power application when you're having a thrash. So let's take a look at this graph. We've got three oil grades: 10W40, 5W40, 0W40. So they all start off with a different viscosity when cold, but they all end up the same viscosity when hot or at operating temperature. So basically, they're going to do the same job in a car that's on the racetrack or driving around. The only thing they're going to do differently is have different viscosity during cold start. And basically, if you're in a hot temperature, you'd use the 10W40. If you live in somewhere that's freezing cold, you would use 0W40. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that in an engine, if everything stays the same, the second number is what determines viscosity. And the other thing we also look at when it comes to viscosity is if everything in the car stays the same, as viscosity goes up, oil pressure also goes up. And this extra oil pressure is why we recommend 10W60 in all RB engines. Now, if you've ever watched the oil pressure gauge on a GTR or any RB for that matter, you'll know that they can quite often suffer from running relatively low oil pressure and struggling to hold oil pressure up top. Now, a lot of modern cars, on the other hand, they run low oil pressure at idle and, well, often quite through the rev range on purpose, but that's got to do with modern construction, modern materials, and modern clearances in their engine assembly. And here's the thing, a lot of manufacturers actually run really thin oil, not because that's what the engine needs or wants or is the best for it. They often run a really thin oil to get better fuel economy and better emissions. And in this day and age, meeting emissions targets and fuel economy targets is more important than how well the car works at a racetrack. Now, if you have a look inside an owner's handbook, such as the one on screen now from the Nissan Z, you can see that the manufacturer will actually tell you that you can use other viscosities, and they'll generally try and tell you which one's based on the climate that you live in. In Australia, we live in a warmer climate, so therefore the handbook is telling us we can go to a thicker oil. Now, when it comes to modifying and racing a car, our attitude is we no longer care about fuel economy or emissions, we care about protecting the engine. And when you make more power or when you go to the racetrack, temperatures will go up beyond operating temperature. So therefore, looking after the engine by having a higher viscosity oil is what we're looking for. Now, we know from experience that RBs love oil pressure. Having higher oil pressure than what you'd expect in an RB helps keep them alive. How do we know this? Well, from working with companies like Croydon Racing Developments, Nitto Performance Engineering, PMC Race Engines, Platinum Racing Products, Castrol and Newline Oil, working with these companies and monitoring the wear and tear on these engines, their performance and their reliability means that, well, we've just worked it out over the years from experience. Thicker oil and a larger oil pressure is what helps keep RBs alive. And this is the reason why when you upgrade your oil pump in your GTR, when you build your engine, we always go for a higher volume or higher flowing oil pump. Why? Because it gives you higher oil pressure. Now, our GTR, when we had the stock bottom end, we were lucky if oil pressure would peak at 60 psi and it would struggle to stay over 50 psi above 8,000 RPM. But on our current built engine with the Nitto billet oil pump, we're seeing 90 psi, even on 1,100 horsepower and 9,500 RPM. And at idle, at operating temperature, it's already at 60 psi. In fact, we see over 130 psi when the car is cold and we first started up at idle. So you can tell if that's how CID and Nitto are setting it up, then that's exactly what the RB likes to have. Now let's go into even more experiences we've had with RBs when it comes to oil. Now, back in 2005 when Castrol launched Edge Oil in Australia, we were involved with their technical team in making some training and technical videos about their new Castrol Edge Oil. And one of the cars they were testing oil in was Theo Woolett's 1,000 horsepower R32 GTR. And we were privy to a lot of samples and results of testing oil in that car. And basically, the technicians at Castrol came back and said, the RB loves 10W60. It was more of the same working with Newline Oils, who also have an oil sample testing program. And we were involved in a couple of time attack cars that were giving back oil samples running anything from 040 to 550 and then 1060. And the results with 10W60 showed better bearing wear and the engine was more reliable. So our theory behind using 10W60 isn't just based on our own car, it's based on results that we've seen with oil companies as well. Now, another thing that we've noticed after 10 years of making GTR technical content is every time we recommend to somebody that they switch to 10W60, the feedback that we get is always that the car has better oil pressure, more stable oil pressure, and sometimes even the oil temperature is kept in check as well. But really, the best proof we have is the fact that we had a stock bottom end GTR that we developed for over 6 years. It went into the nines, made well over 700 wheel horsepower, and we never had any problems when it came to oil with that car. The bearings were perfect when we pulled that engine apart, and we had always run Castrol Edge 10W60, and then we switched to Newline Race Oil 10W60. Now, we all know that it's not just the viscosity that matters, it's how good a quality it is. So obviously both of those engine oil brands were very good quality and had the right additives in them so that that engine oil would work with E85. So it's important to look at not just the viscosity, but also the quality of the engine oil as well. Now, since we switched from stock bottom end over to a 3.2 litre built engine that makes 1,100 horsepower, one thing that we do have with this combination is a clear view filter. So we are able to monitor the bearing wear on this engine since we put it all together. And honestly, since it's been put together, we've had basically no bearing wear, no material in the filter, and nothing to worry about. So just more proof that the Nitto billet oil pump and huge oil pressure with 10W60 is what's helping keep this engine happy and reliable. So, should you switch your RB over to 10W60? If you ask us, it is simply yes. However, you do need to remember this. If you have some type of issue with your engine, giving it low oil pressure, 10W60 isn't some band-aid that's going to fix everything. You might need to actually fix your issue, such as bad bearing wear giving higher clearances, or some type of damaged or worn out oil pump. Now, if your engine builder says to use a different viscosity, listen to your engine builder and your tuner. Your warranty is with them. We're not going to argue and say that they're wrong. We're just telling you what our experience is using 10W60 inside RB engines. And that is, more oil pressure, the better. Now, we hope you learnt something from this Motive RB and GTR tuning guide video. Don't forget to subscribe, as there's plenty more to come.